Well, here we are again.
Yeah, Tom Hill.
When were we here last? In November?
Yeah, interesting people from all different kinds of backgrounds, all different kinds of conversations. We were talking about mental health, we were talking about new currencies, we were talking about music and how it's generated, we were talking about different forms of living, whether you're living in a building or in a moving vehicle.
And you took us downstairs and we made one of these rugs that you guys can't quite see, but they're stitched together like this material.
Yeah, it's cool.
And then we did the gig in the evening on it and it was amazing. So we met a couple of years ago now at that Shivers Venture thing.
Yes.
Then I came and made a video showing your process, and then we brought the gang.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, I should introduce this. Guys, welcome back to New Agreements, the podcast where I get together with friends and colleagues I've met along the way who I think have something interesting for us to learn from about how we might shape the future in a way that's sustainable, that works, that helps us flourish. And today I'm chuffed to be back here with Kresse Wesling, who runs Elvis and Kresse with your partner. I'm sure you can explain more about how that works.
Yeah.
And I'm just really chuffed, well, I'm always chuffed to be here, and glad to pick your brains and share a bit about, I guess, a conversation we started a year ago or so, which is about how we get the best grassroots ideas up to a decision-making level in society so that we can actually action them. But why don't you start by telling us a bit about what you guys do in this amazing place?
So Elvis and I came here in 2013, but we've been here for much longer. We've been running the business for much longer. I moved to the UK in 2004, and this was before you could Google how much waste we produced as a nation. So I had to go to the British Library to find out. And I discovered in that year it was 100 million tons of material that went to landfill. And I didn't know what that looked like, so I started going to all the landfills I could get to get a picture of it in my mind. And I saw so many materials that were coming from industrial uses that clearly had a second life in them, or clearly were capable of being recycled, even by some existing process, and just weren't because the landfill tax is so low, or people weren't applying creativity to it. And I thought, how can I do something? And then I saw a fire hose and I thought, yeah, that's going to be my way, because just love it. It's a beautiful material. So we had a meeting with the London Fire Brigade in 2005. We set up the business, and the main reason to set up the business was to rescue London's fire hose. They produce between 3 and 10 tons of fire hose every year. We turn it into bags, belts, wallets, products like that, and then 50% of the profits go to the firefighters charity. So we started with fire hose, and now we collect 15 different materials, and the list expands all the time, the amount that we can take expands all the time, and the team expands all the time. And
it is incredible the journey you guys have been on. Even in the short time I've known you, you can see that you're not resting on your laurels of previous things you've figured out. There's a nice flow and process of innovation, of new ideas. One of the cool partnerships is the Burberry partnership, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In 2010 we started looking at leather waste, and there's 800,000 tons of that a year globally. So it's this enormous problem, and it's because a cowhide is shaped like this and handbags aren't. And you have these offcuts that fall to the cutting room floor, and we just thought there's got to be a better way to create a system around changing the future of that material. So we came up with a Lego-like design that allows you to make the most of these unusable scraps. And now the partnership with Burberry is about sharing that system with the world, because we don't want the world's leather waste to come here. We want to solve that problem where it is. And I suppose that's an innovation in itself, because most companies would want to control the whole process, and we want to control none of the process. We want to say, hey, here's this wonderful solution. Do you want to take part in it?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how the partnership with Burberry is working.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I've found inspiring being around you, is that you are looking to capture some of the value that you create by creating products and selling them and making profit and sharing that profit with your partners, but using your knowledge. I mean, this might be too crude to say it this way, but using your knowledge and your methodology both as a public service and as an extension of your marketing in a way, because you're sharing your knowledge, sharing your process, well, essentially trying to outsource or crowdsource, should I say, the solving of the problem rather than trying to manage it all in-house and build your empire.
Yeah.
And I think that is the kind of culture that, to me, it feels like we need going forwards, and is helped by the internet that we now have. You don't have to run around to all these waste sites with your pen and paper. We can share it online and inspire others to participate in a similar way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a crazy stat that farming in the UK could be something like 150% more efficient if the worst performing farms just operated like the best performing farms. And that's just because there is this imperfect knowledge, and sometimes people are farming based on tradition and things that they've always done. And actually, if there's a new way of doing something that's much more interesting, much more efficient, means that you're going to be a better steward for the land, means that there's going to be less downstream flooding, means that there's going to be less erosion of the soil, there's going to be increased biodiversity. Why aren't we all doing that? Our view is that if you have a solution to something, like keeping it close to your chest is the most pointless possible thing. Because if you believe the scientists, which will tell you that you have 10 years to save the planet, then every single good idea has to be shared.
Absolutely. The moment that I knew that we were going to spend more time together was as we were leaving Holland, and somehow we talked about Wendell Berry.
Yeah.
And I could see that he had been a big part of your life, probably much bigger than mine, but a new person for me at that time. I actually, in the post today, got a Wendell Berry book that I had ordered. It's a tiny little cute book that says why I'm not going to buy a computer. I think it's just an essay that they put into a book. I'm looking forward to reading that. Is there something that you feel, a learning that you found, that you keep finding that when you meet with these companies like Burberry or whoever it may be, that you just wish there was something that, and is there something that you found around materials that you're just like, if you would just get this idea, guys, we could be running so much more efficiently?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one is people don't seem to recognize when you're there to help. So it's a suspicion. There is a huge suspicion between companies. What are they looking for? What are they after? What do they want from me? Am I charging enough money? There's an inherent lack of trust, and that means that you can't go to someone with a solution and say, hey, let's give this a try, because they're like, really? What, why?
What am I missing?
How's that going to hurt my reputation? How's that going to hurt the bottom line? And so I think particularly with the larger organizations, they feel like any change is going to risk their reputation. Any change is going to disrupt their supply chain. Any change might annoy their consumers. So that's why there's this real snail pace when we need rocket ship pace.
But you have overcome that, though. I mean, you've managed to get some of these partnerships off the ground. And what do you think the source is for you to manage to bridge that trust gap then?
So and this is actually when you were talking about the fact that yes, we want to share things, but we also like make our own products and sell them. The main reason why I think Elvis and I will always be making things and selling them is because we don't ever want to be perceived as consultants. We want people to see that we are operating good ideas, that this is not a concept, this is all operational. We've done it, we've proven it, it's working. It's making money, it's employing people, it's paying taxes. So there's no way to dispute it if we're doing it. We're not ever going into Burberry saying, why don't you guys try this? We have never tried it. Why don't you be the guinea pig? We are making ourselves the guinea pig, and then we're saying this is how we are thriving as a guinea pig.
Yeah.
Look at my happy guinea pig life.
I feel the same way. Like when I do bits of consultancy, it's only ever stuff that relates to what I've done myself or am doing myself.
Yeah.
One, I worry that if I'm not doing it or done it, that where my knowledge might be wrong or stale, and I can't evangelize it in the same way.
Yeah.
You're right, that connection between making and sharing is vital to keep the flow moving. And that leads me on to kind of the conversation that we had last time around, I'd never met anybody like you before I met you. Well, one, because you're a special person, but two, because the knowledge that you've generated around the topic of waste, reusing, upcycling, if you use that term. And you sit on a couple of boards, don't you?
Keep Britain Tidy, which is the biggest charity that's around waste and space and trying to basically keep us from littering and get us to A, cherish our natural environment, and B, cherish the raw materials that we're lucky enough to possess. Okay,
you're here doing stuff, figuring stuff out every day, learning on the ground grassroots knowledge. Then these kind of umbrella organisations bring people like you in because of that kind of grassroots knowledge. And then I guess the government then come to groups like that to say, hey, what should we do, right?
Yeah.
And so what it made me think was, wow, actually it's you and people like you in the space, it's your knowledge that I actually want to make sure gets its way all the way up into the policy making rooms. Have you seen that happen? Like, does that transition from the grassroots knowledge make its way nicely into those rooms?
Sometimes it does. So I was on a government panel that was about having more women on boards. And it was really interesting to debate that as an issue, because obviously we need more diverse boards, but I don't think it's more important to have women if the women that are on the board have the same exact experience as the men who are already on the board. If they're in the same age range and they went to the same schools and they had the same previous jobs, I'm not sure I would classify that as diversity. So I that was the argument that I was making. And a lot of the entrepreneurs there equally were making the argument that we didn't want quotas because none of us wanted to be seen to be there just because we were filling a seat. So that was interesting because we were feeding directly into how the government might tackle it. And all of the feedback that the female panel gave was taken very seriously. And then there was one, actually an amazing evening that I was invited to recently in Margate, which is, Margate's a fascinating place that is got some new funding to really reinvigorate it. It's obviously had the Turner put there, but there's 2 communities that are among the most deprived in Britain. And this community meeting was about a £25 million bursary that the new government has decided Margate should have to develop. And the community convened this meeting to say we would actually like a say in how this money gets distributed. And there was people there who'd been trying to work out who the decision makers were and couldn't because it was this entirely opaque thing. And there was people there who were terrified that it was going to go into 2 key projects and not actually serve the people in the community that are most in need. And the debate was so incredible because there was all kinds of just people who'd arrived with their kids, people who had come down from London and were new artists working in that area, people who've been living there all their lives. There was an amazing ex-head teacher who runs something called Summer Kitchen there, where she teaches families how to cook and commune, and she teaches them with waste food there was some spectacular people there. And the policy that I came up with on the fly, on the night, comes straight from the B Corp movement. And because they were saying we've got a slum landlord problem, we've got this problem, we've got that problem. One of the things that you have to do when you're a B Corp is you have to change the constitution of your business to say that shareholders are not more important than the environment or its people, which is completely different from the Companies Act. The Companies Act says shareholders are king, everything has to be fiduciary duty, everything has to serve the shareholder. And actually, if I was going to make one policy change in this country tomorrow, I would change the Companies Act and I would say shareholders are not more important than the environment or its people. Because you couldn't be a slum landlord then. Because you couldn't profit at the expense of your tenants.
Okay, so let's just rewind for a second for anybody that's not familiar.
Okay.
So when you're talking about the Companies Act, right?
Yes.
That is just the legal responsibilities of a normal private company in the UK.
Yes.
Any company that somebody will have bought something from or, eaten in their restaurant will have a responsibility to basically put the interests of the shareholders first. And that's actually a responsibility, they have to do that. And everything else comes second. B Corp is a relatively new movement, which you're a part of, right?
Yes.
And that essentially tries to do what you're saying, levels the playing field of all the stakeholders, the environment, the people in the business?
The people in the business and the customers that you serve and the wider stakeholder community. So basically you have to understand that we're interdependent and that you can't have a shareholder somewhere that earns so much money at the expense of the environment and its people. So you couldn't have modern slavery if all the governments in the world changed all of their equivalents of the Companies Act law, basically, to say that people and planet were as important as shareholders.
When did you become a B Corp?
2015, so we were one of the first ones in the UK.
And why did you do it?
Because we were behaving like this anyway. The B Corp movement is only 10 years old, we're 15 years old. So we were a pre-B Corp, I guess. We wanted to certify because it's third-party certification, it's externally validated, it's a very rigorous process. And there's a wider community of companies that are coming together to look at things like net zero by 2050? I don't think so. Why don't we talk about net zero by 2030? And those are much more interesting conversations when you're having them collectively than on your own. So instead of Elvis and I just thinking about what our ideas are for net zero by 2030, we're with Innocent Smoothies, we're with Able and Cole Organic Food Delivery Box, we're with Clipper Tea, we're with Ben and Jerry's, we're with Patagonia, and we're collectively having that conversation.
And is it scaling? Like in the 10 years, is there many B Corps now?
Yeah, it's scaling, and actually at the moment it's scaling faster than their ability to certify new companies.
I see.
So there's more companies that want to be B Corps than they can certify. Which is exciting because it means, like, I'm happy for there to be a backlog there because it just means everybody wants to come and join the party.
Yeah. Are there any tax incentives at the moment for people to run a B Corp instead of running a normal limited company? And then is there a movement within the B Corp community to try to get government to implement that as a standard way of incorporating a business?
We talk about, should we go for tax breaks? Because that will mean more companies want to be B Corps. Should we go for a straight out policy change, which would be pretty radical because there's 269 British B Corps compared to the hundreds of thousands of British businesses.
Yeah, I think there's about 1 million.
So we'd be asking all of these other companies to just completely change quite radically. And imagine how difficult that would be for a British American Tobacco or a Shell or a BP, a company that made guns or weapons, any company that extracted, a company that sells just bottled water in plastic bottles. It's quite difficult for them.
So the thing that has sort of brought me back out of the woods, if you will, and interested in, I guess, doing business again, short-term thinking, transactions with other organisations, is because of the climate situation that we have. And I do tend to agree with the scientists and the IPCC report, thinking that we've got this decade really to pull our finger out and make some radical changes. And it is kind of interesting because we tend to believe that the arc of society, moves towards good over the long term. But this situation creates an urgency that's quite fascinating, because normally I would think, oh yeah, those companies, they're not going to change, with whatever moral or ethical issue they've got. It'll slowly evolve over time with the changing of the guard. But actually we're in a position that right now, maybe if they can't change quick enough, they should just stop operating. And actually that's the right thing for them to do. There'll be massive collateral damage of people's homes and their mortgages and their employment, but it's a kind of an interesting social scenario where we're being forced to think about a very short period of time of 10 years rather than, by the next generation things will have, evolved and women will have more equality and, slavery will become, it's like, no, we've actually got to sort it out right now. Where does the world of CO2e or carbon mix with the B Corp community? Is it a big topic? It's a
huge topic, and certainly it's something that you have to be very transparent about when you're through your certification process. So you have to say how you derive your energy. So if you actually generate it yourself, you'd have to talk about that. If you buy it, you have to talk about who you buy it from, but you also have to express it in kilowatt hours. And the same goes for water usage. And that means that everybody would know how much water we used, how much electricity used, how much gas we used, and where we were buying it from, and whether we were buying renewably sourced or not.
They would, or they do. Like, is it public?
Yeah, so my score is public. As far as I know, it's completely transparent how we score in the different categories. And I think the most interesting thing about the B Lab assessment, so in order to start your process to become a B Corp, you have to fill out this assessment form.
Okay.
There's thousands of companies that are using that tool for free. And what they're finding out is that there's probably very easy solutions to some of the problems they're currently facing. They might find that actually they've got terrible governance structures. They might find that, oh gosh, I don't actually know where my energy comes from. Or maybe I can only account for 80% of my energy. But yes, carbon is a big issue within the community. We had a community meeting about a month ago in the UK, maybe 6 weeks ago now, where everyone came together, or the people within the team who were responsible for like a net zero by 2030 goals, and we were all sitting there sharing information. How do we do this? How do we do that? Has anyone tried this? Does anyone know that? Do we all know what the footprint is of our websites? Do we know actually when you send an email what that is in carbon? So yeah, I think it's something that as a community we're all very aware of, and that would be how you were perceived of as cool within the B Corp community. Well, we managed to do this. But the first thing you do is then tell everyone else, and then they don't copy you.
Yeah, well, that's it. That's the quick cross-pollination, I guess, and
Yeah.
that's the benefit of communities in general, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if someone's listening to this who's running a small company or considering running a small company, what kind of community member fits well?
Well, I think the first thing, if you are thinking that you want to be an entrepreneur, you want to set up a business, something like that. So if you're at the phase where you don't even have your business idea yet, before going down the Beatport route, I would look at the SDGs and and interrogate any business idea against those.
Which is, just for the record, like the UN
the
17
Sustainable Development Goals. Yeah.
Sustainable Development Goals, 17 different topics.
And it's like poverty, water shortages, sustainable consumption and production, equality. It just covers all these wonderful things.
Yeah.
And if your business idea isn't tackling one of those problems, then come up with a better idea. So the first little filter I want to apply is if your business is like, well, I want to make a slightly better shoelace and it's not actually going to help with any of the SDGs in any way, then it's a crap idea. Come up with a better one.
Yeah.
You've got 10 years.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want you to spend the next 3 years of your life on something that's not going to make you feel as a human being like you have fed into something awesome and good. I'm not saying you're crap. I'm just saying I know how amazing this feels.
Yeah.
I want you to feel the same. So reevaluate your idea. And then once you kind of got that, then I would go online and look at the B-Lab assessment and look at what it's going to ask of you. And even push beyond that. It's not going to ask everything of you. And this is actually when we talk about what a company could be. It's like, I don't care if you're an oil and gas company today. You have all of these assets, all of this human capital, all of these skilled people. It's up to you to decide what you want to do 5 years from now.
Yeah.
And you could use all of your infrastructure to completely revolution. And would there be some upheaval? Would some people leave? Might the share price struggle? But yeah, the share price is struggling in coronavirus time.
Yeah.
So let the share price struggle for a while. And go for something better. You know, it's not like this hasn't been done before. What is it? There's a car company, I want to say Renault, it's one of the French ones, but they made washing machines and they're like, oh yeah, and then let's do this. And they completely reinvented themselves and loads of companies have done that. IBM is an interesting case, you know. It's called international business machines. They don't really do that anymore.
Yeah.
So you don't have to do what you always did.
It reminds me of wartime efforts as well, because you know, we didn't like shut down all the factories.
No.
We just said, hang on guys, stop making zippers or something like that. It's like, we need all this infrastructure. It's useful infrastructure. We just need to make something else that's going to help us survive in this emergency. And then when we're back to normal, well, you can go back to making the things that you were making, you know.
Yeah.
It's just really hard to generate that kind of impetus, that sort of sense that we're in a wartime effort. When, especially in the UK, I've got to say, the weather is so benign.
Yeah.
It doesn't get too hot, it doesn't get too cold.
But we've had constant flooding for the last month and a half.
That's true.
There's some communities that have been underwater since Christmas.
Yeah, and actually, having said that, you're right. And my auntie's town in Wales, people have lost their homes, and so we are seeing a trickle of that. I mean, you have water that runs right under this building right here, so I know you're probably very acutely aware of that.
Yeah.
But in the grand scheme of things, we're not the corner of the global village that's getting done the worst. You know, somewhere, I always think of Bangladesh. I always think Bangladesh feels like the corner of the global village that gets hit the worst. Most vulnerable to getting totally flooded. And then all of the raw end of our ethics around clothing production and stuff is expressed worst in places like Bangladesh.
We don't get the worst of it because it's a wealthy country, so there's to a certain extent there's some kind of a buffer. But look at, I mean, Syria is a really interesting example. I read an article about how there was 5 years of drought, which pushed a lot of people from rural areas into the cities, and then there wasn't enough work in the cities, which led to, lots of different kinds of conflict and people seeking out different ways of living, and unfortunately that was abused by people who wanted to seize power in a violent way and people who wanted to maintain power in a violent way, and then you have a civil war. And if that was caused by drought, which we can link to climate change, I mean, of course it's not going to be the only contributing factor, but if it was even remotely part of the factor, then that's the death and displacement of millions of people. We have to take environmental concerns a lot more seriously than we do. I think it's fascinating, particularly in the time of coronavirus right now, is that everyone I mean, Italy is on lockdown. China is on lockdown. And we've done that because of a virus. But climate change is a much bigger problem.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I want to lock everybody down because of climate change, but wouldn't it be, I met someone the other day who said, if someone told me tomorrow, look, don't eat red meat, don't fly more than once a year, don't do this, don't do that, and also, these are the skills you've got. Can we take some of those skills and put 20% of your time into these crucial activities? And you will feel useful, and you will know you're contributing. And by the way, everybody else's skills are going to be used in a certain way. He's like, that's the world I want to live in. I just want to make this right. But he's like, I don't know what my skills are best placed to do. And I feel like if I'm just doing it on my own, it's not enough. So he wanted two things. He wanted someone with expertise to help him channel his activities in the right way, but he also wanted to know that it was something the wider community that was doing, everyone was doing together.
The thing with coronavirus or war is that there's like an enemy and then there's fear, and that is a very powerful actor, not in a necessarily good or sustainable way, but it produces a response. That's why I'm doing this podcast, because I think that the agreements that we make, the policies that we put into action and that we champion, fill that gap where something is silent and creeping up behind us. You need those that have got space and time and access to knowledge to say, I know you can't feel the burn right now, but trust me, this is something that we need to put in place. And I always think about seatbelts. Seatbelts is not something that we ask the individual to say, look, do you want to wear your seatbelt or not? Like, it's up to you. If you feel like it and you think it's the right thing to do, then do it. We just say no. You just have to, because the science is clear. We just know what happens. And we just don't want to burden you with that responsibility because we know it's good for you. And there's a sense that I think what your friend is describing is, someone please just tell me what to do to be a good person. Like, be clear and let's all do it together and let's just change the norm. And I guess that's what the B Corp movement is trying to do, is kind of build that critical mass of a different way of thinking.
We're trying to, people talk about being the change. We just want to, we want to offer a different way of running a business and showing that it's possible and that it's fun and that it's interesting. B Corps within the UK outperform the British economy by 20%.
Wow.
So it's a pretty powerful stat. And these are the kinds of bits of data that we need to update from time to time. But it doesn't surprise me, because B Corps attract interesting, diverse groups of people that love to solve problems and are committed to making the world better. So if they're committed to making the world better, then of course they're going to be committed to making the business better.
So I think it goes without saying, but I just want to hear it. After spending time in the B Corp community, is it all it's cracked up to be? Is it what it claims to be?
I mean, yes, absolutely. And I can say that I've been in the social enterprise space and the B Corp space, and these are communities of absolutely wonderful people that you would want to spend all of your time with, that you would want to do all of your trading with, that you would want to succeed and support in their success. And I don't always feel that way when I engage with businesses outside of that space, because I don't see within B Corps and within social enterprise, I don't see the selfish drivers that sort of define, psychotic capitalism. I don't see that. I don't see people going, I just need to make money. I'll give it all away as charity later. You don't see that.
Yeah.
You don't counter that worldview.
People want to live a life that's full of passion and purpose and long term, do stuff. Like, hence why I'm back here again. It's just fun.
It is.
To be together and do stuff that matters.
And it's nice to be around people who they understand you. Fundamentally, they understand you, are the same wavelength, but they also want to push you. So it's not like I'm just like, oh yeah, you're great, and you can just be like this little greatness over there. It's like, no, but like, you're great, but how can you be greater? And how can this be greater? And how can we do more? And that's quite exciting too, because like there's no laurels to rest on. Like, it's like, come on.
So I find it interesting that we're talking about new agreements, and I'm saying what's the thing, or one or two things that we should be really championing for as a new agreement in society. And I thought you were going to say something about waste and how we treat waste, but what you've talked about is sort of how we treat businesses and how we expect governance and the purpose of businesses to operate. Is that representative of where your journey has gone over 15 years, or is there also something that you could and would say about the specialism of waste?
Yeah, I mean, waste is like the core of everything that we do. For me, waste is just something that shouldn't exist. It's something that we invented over 2 generations, 3 generations, and we can disinvent it. We can find ways to live without it. We can find ways to live in different, more exciting, more innovative ways that don't result in landfill. And it's just a failure of creativity. So I'm always talking about injecting actual honest-to-goodness creativity into a sector that has claimed to be creative for a long time, which is fashion. So we're in the fashion luxury space. And it celebrates its head designers to the nth degree. And I look at most of these head designers and think of them as being essentially quite destructive, because the pace at which they're making products, the processes that they use and the materials that they choose just have a pathway of destruction behind them. Whether that be, you know, let's say modern slavery, as you're saying, in places not just Bangladesh, but Nottinghamshire, right? And whether that be open dye pits where we're putting carcinogens right into the rivers because we're dyeing things in possible colors and we're using impossible chemicals, or whether it's just a complete misuse of a resource that should be cherished and loved and used for a higher purpose. So I think of, you know, some of these designers as inherently destructive, and of course I want to show that it can be different. When you talk about it as a journey, we started with waste and we were making that work. And then I look at the bigger picture and how can what we do with waste inform how people behave as entrepreneurs and as business leaders. So I'm always trying to think, how can anything that's good, any nugget of any good thing, how can that explode and inform lots of other different things? So waste is my way in, it's my expertise, but it thankfully has given me a platform to talk about all kinds of other exciting things.
And will you ever do a Kresse Wesling University of Waste?
You know what? I think we sort of already do, because we have young designers coming here all the time. We have students coming here on work experience all the time. We have people coming from all over the world. I get a constant question from people in other countries saying, "Tell me how to use fire hose. We've got fire hose here." And I'll say, "Well, how many hoses do you have there?" And they'll say 1 or 2. I was like, "Okay, don't waste your time on 1 or 2 hoses. Go to your landfill site and tell me what you see." I got this incredible feedback from someone in the Ukraine, and she said, "Well, I see these 10 things repetitively." And I was like, "Which one's your favorite?" And then she's now set off on this whole project around the things she fell in love with. So she's creating her own story. And that's the dialogue that I will have every single day. That's the conversation I would have every single day.
And that, you know, that brings us back to the beginning of your story, obviously. And something that stuck out to me that I was going to bring up is that this all starts with experience. You know, you didn't read in a textbook or whatever. You went and visited people, visited these landfills and experienced it and viscerally connected with it, and then found the thing that you liked and went off and did it. And I like that you're inviting people into that same journey of experience, because once you have a connection to something, it's easy to invite others to build that connection and relationship. But for as long as it's academic or it's the right thing to do, it kind of stays all a bit distant, doesn't it? And that's why I like bringing my group to places like here and to other chateaus and places around the place, because once you get them inside and have the actual experience of what it feels like to be in a different culture, it can be totally transformative and change people's paths entirely.
Yeah, and that's why I think that's why the last thing I want people to have to somehow give up. I mean, obviously flying is a big deal carbon-wise, but I do want people to be able to travel and explore, because if you haven't ever understood what a landfill site might look like in Canada versus an open pit of waste in India, you can't fundamentally get to grips with how this challenge looks for different communities. And actually a lot of the, let's say, frugal innovation that's called Jugaad in India is way better and more advanced than I would say what Alice and I do. Because people's concept of waste is so much more advanced, because they really don't see it as waste. It's always a resource, 100% of the time a resource. Okay, I have my one particular bit of expertise, but I do think it's really important for us to be able to learn from each other and see the context that these things are existing in for communities with different challenges. And that's, I suppose, because, fundamentally, I don't want us to have world wars and to be fighting over resources. So I want for this information to be shared widely, very widely.
And so you're talking about a lack of creativity at times, and it's only a lack of imagination that sees something as waste rather than a resource to be used, and other cultures like in India where you see that as standard and more prevalent. Is the path to using our resources better just reinstalling an imagination, or is there also a governance piece as well? And maybe there's not, but if there is, what would you like to see on the other side?
There's a huge governance piece, because even though landfill rates have come down in the UK since I've been here, we're still at 40 million tonnes a year, minimum. And we can't have that. So the government has to do brave things like say, you can't make it if it can't be recycled. If there is no recycling technology possible for this particular material that you're creating in the world, you can't have it. So that would mean that everyone who is inventing a novel material would also have to invent the way to break that down or transform it into something else. And that means that we couldn't have nuclear power until we had the ability to deal with nuclear waste. Starbucks couldn't sell us coffee in paper cups unless that paper cup had a guaranteed way to be recycled. And we've had decades of paper cups that couldn't be recycled. You can recycle them now, but they should have had to invest in that from day one.
So if you're thinking about the product life cycle, we've kind of only been interested about the first half of the equation.
Yes.
But you're saying we should take responsibility for the whole equation before we're allowed to take the first step out of the factory. I love that.
We can't deliver life unless we can deliver death.
Oh, Kresse, you're getting into Wendell Berry territory now.
But why not? Why not? It's just that's a lack of ambition too. And how?
It sounds dead simple when you say it. Obviously, of course, you've got to figure out. You've got to figure out how to do it, the whole thing, and then you get to do it. But we just haven't been doing that, And
I think that's why these ideas come from people like Wendell Berry, because he lives in nature all the time, and nature does this so well. Nature does life and death, every year. Well,
there's nothing other than that. No. You can't sit in the woods and nothing stays constant at all. So,
but everything is recycled and everything is reused. Nature doesn't waste anything, ever. There isn't a redundant anything in nature. Even when people say, wasps, what are wasps for? There is a purpose for everything in nature. It's just that we've come along and we've created all of these novel materials, and we've created no hopers. And I just think, why? So that's another question I would ask someone who was starting out as an entrepreneur, particularly if they're making something. I saw someone at a design university, and they were coming up with an at-home system for roasting your own coffee beans. And I just thought, do we need another appliance in a house, particularly one that is designed to roast a small fraction of beans? When it's going to take up this much of your shelf, it's going to use all kinds of materials that can't then be separated out from each other, and so you can have. Really, can you promise me that you can taste the difference in that coffee? Come on.
Yeah, I'm with you. So to kind of wind it up then, that brings us up to today, So 15 years in, how old are you now, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 43.
43. 43 years young. What excites you now? At the beginning of this podcast, when you explain Elvis and Kresse, you will have done that 10,000 times. It's not your first rodeo, do you know what I mean? When you get out of bed now and you go to do work, what hope for the future is it that genuinely makes you go, I'm just still stoked that I get to do this, or whatever?
Elvis and I broke it down actually right around when we turned 40. This is all great in retrospect, but we worked out that our 20s were about working out what we wanted to do and who we were, that kind of thing. Our 30s were about trying to get good at those things. And our 40s and beyond, I'm guessing, but let's reconvene in 7 years, is about delivering that. And so this is my impact decade. So the thing that makes me excited every day is that we know how to do what we do now really, really well. We know what our expertise is, and we know how that contributes to the world. So if we're not trying to maximize the impact of that every single day, then we're wasting our time. The beauty in having Elvis in the business with me is that maybe
a partnership is strong because you've got two people in it that have an enormous amount of mutual respect and also want to ensure that the other person has a fulfilled and challenging life. And we both feel that way about each other and for each other, and we both understand the concept of the impact decade. And it's what we want to achieve in different ways, but it's what we want to do. So I can't ever forget that because I've got someone who's rooting for me and egging me on. And I think that, of course, that's what we got to do. And I don't know how that couldn't be exciting, because that's a ridiculous privilege.
And I got to say, like, having spent time here over that weekend and other visits I've done, watching, not in a creepy way, but watching you and Elvis interact is one of the most, if not the most special thing about being in the space. And because everything else really is genuinely an expression of that relationship. I do partner dancing, so I like thinking about how those two people in that moment create and express something. I think about it a lot as a metaphor for relationship and what comes out of that, and it is a very cool and special thing. And I think you are super lucky to have each other, to have each other to bounce off and make you better over these like 15 years or whatever it's been. It's you can see why it's led to all of this cool stuff that you guys do. So I mean, just to say thanks for the last couple of years of the interactions we've had and the openness that you guys have received our group with and shared ideas and stuff. It makes a big difference that you not just do your work, but approach it in the way that you do and approach friendship in the way that you do. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so do we. I mean, we love having people come down, and the group was hysterical. And we talk about that all the time, because people are like, really? You had all these strangers in the house? And we're like, well, it didn't really feel like that. Especially it felt like we had a house full of people.
Yeah, no, it was great. Yeah. It does feel like home. And not to be morbid, but because we've broached the topic a couple of times. So when your days are done and you go back to the ground, like, what do you hope people say?
Oh, I thought you were going to say, how would you like to go? Because I've told Elvis that I wanted him to drag me out somewhere and leave me for the vultures, but apparently it's like totally illegal in the UK. Because I do not want to be, like, burning me seems like a waste of like energy, and unless they can use the heat to heat a public swimming pool or something, and burying me seems like a waste of land, like a waste of land. But the vultures are hungry,
Vultures. I mean, if you said like the little bluebirds, or just
the voles, the creatures,
whatever,
the scavengers. Yeah. But vultures feels, I don't know, like that's their job. I don't know about an individual legacy. I don't know about that. If what we do persists, if our ideas persist, if the openness with which we approach the world persists, if humanity persists, I think I'll be happy with that. If we somehow manage to get to grips with climate change, we make decisions based on whether it's going to make the world better for other people's grandchildren. It's always been our shorthand. And so Elvis and I don't have kids. So what we would hope our legacy would be that the world actually did end up being better for other people's grandchildren.
Well, long may the adventure continue. And I hope we share many more experiences here and elsewhere over the years to come, making the world better for other people's grandchildren.
Yes, indeed.
Thanks, Kresse.
Thanks.